while we get this set up, thank you so much. I have to say, the key to being one of the top 4 women in drones is just to be a woman in drones. There aren't too many of them, so I can't take too much credit for that title. It was an easy one to get. All right, we'll go ahead and get started. So I sat in some really, really fascinating panels earlier, you guys talking about how you're using drones. But one of the first thing that people always ask me is, who are you trying to spy on with that drone? And this is a very common question I get, and you might have even asked this to someone before. And so we were thinking of, what type of topic I should talk about, and privacy issues are usually the #1 thing that people are curious about and that really freaks people out. So I'm going to go ahead and start by taking us on a little history lesson, taking us back to 1940s, to 1946. Back in 1946, there was a farmer in North Carolina, and he lived near a small airport. Now, after World War II, during World War II, the military took control of that airport, and they started flying in these really big planes. These really big planes are really loud. They were flying really low to the ground over his property, and there's a big problem with this. This farmer, he was actually a chicken farmer, and the planes were stressing out his chickens. They stopped laying eggs, and some of them actually started flying into walls because they were so stressed. So this farmer lost most of his business, all due to this airport flying these military planes so close to his land. So he ended up suing the U.S. military, and as you can see, that case went all the way up to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court, they actually came to the conclusion that if you own property, your property rights extend 83 feet up into the air. They came to this kind of arbitrary 83 feet number because that was as low as the planes were actually flying over his house. So the military planes were flying over his land, and that was sort of the end of that case. So this is pretty much as complicated as airspace rules get in year 1946. But flash forward many, many decades later, and I'm about to tell you that it's going to get a lot more complicated, and here's how. So I want to start by showing you this image, and it looks just sort of like an ordinary, really bad drone video that you see on YouTube. And this, of course, was taken of a drone. And what this is a meat packing plant in Dallas. A regular guy with a regular drone was flying just near his house. He was actually just standing on a road trying to get some shots of some land that wasn't over people and easy to fly around. And he was flying a DJI Phantom drone. You guys might actually have these in your newsrooms. They're easy and cheap to buy. They're like $500 on Amazon. And he was flying this drone, and he noticed, if you look in the left corner of that image, that is a creek, and actually there is red in that creek. So I'll let you take a guess. It's a meat packing plant over there on the right, and there's red in the creek, what that is. So he actually handed over these images to the EPA and to the Texas wildlife organizations, and he wrote this quote. I was looking at images after the flight that showed a blood red creek and was thinking, is this really what I thought it could be? Surely not. Actually, surely yes. And so this drone image allowed the Texas government to execute this search warrant, and they actually found out that this meat packing plant was dumping their remains illegally. So this is an example of what you can see with a drone. Now, this is actually really cool. This protects the environment, which is awesome. But you can also imagine if you are the owner of that plant, you now hate drones. Drones are looking over your property, and suddenly people are seeing the things that you don't want them to see. So you can imagine we have gotten a lot more complicated than just some chickens running into walls. girls. So I do want to flash back a little bit. I know some of you are curious about how I got into drones. So I was actually a journalism student at the University of Missouri, so I am that annoying journalist who annoys all of you, Director of Engineers. And we actually had, in its inaugural year, a drone journalism class. So we studied how to fly drones, the laws. The laws do change like every month, and so they were a lot different when I was a student. The ethics, I think, are really important. So that's actually me learning how to fly a drone. That's not him measuring my height. So I got into drones sort of by chance. I just needed 1 credit to graduate, and this was pretty much the only class that fit into my schedule, and so I was really lucky how this turned out. Now, are there any University of Missouri students in the audience? There's one. You might know our other famous alum besides you and me is Brad Pitt. So Brad Pitt actually, he actually didn't graduate. He dropped out 1 credit and he went to Hollywood. I took the drone class, so I did get my degree, so I do think I'm better off than Brad Pitt. So from there, I created this site. So if you are tweeting during this presentation, you can tweet at me at the Drone Girl. And I ended up getting my remote pilot license from the FAA, and here I am. So I know a lot of you guys work with journalists, and you might be curious what they're using them for. So I'll give you one example since we are tight on time. But this one I think is really great, is using drones to show protests. So here's an example from the 2013 protests in Thailand. I'll give you one quick exercise to do. One of the big facts in the story is so many people were at this protest. 28,000 people were at this protest. So I want you to all do me a favor and imagine, what is 28,000 people? What does that look like? Can anyone describe what 28,000 people looks like? Nobody. Okay, that's fine, don't stress. So this is the image that The Guardian ran of this protest. It's like a basic protest photo. This is the image that the Washington Post ran, also nice protest photo. But doesn't really say a whole lot of information in here. This is the photo that The Nation ran on the day of these protests. As you can guess, this is from a drone. So all of you guys who failed my exercise of what 28,000 people looks like, this is how you do it. This is how you show what 28,000 people looks like. I think this is a really powerful image and a great example of the power that drones have.
Is that in the White House?
You actually cannot fly drones over the White House.
Is that picture posted in the White House?
Oh, I don't know. I haven't actually been.
2 million people.
Oh. There you go. Thank you. Thank you. So when you are photographing, as probably many of you know, you have a right to photograph anything in a public space. So I know that example was Thailand, but if it were in the US, you as a photographer or a drone pilot have a right to photograph anything that is in plain view. So this is what the ACLU says you have a right to photograph. So if someone's in a park or in any type of public space, you can photograph them. So the key here is in plain view. Now I want you to circle back to that image I showed you earlier of the blood in the factory. And yes, that is in plain view, but is that in plain view from the ground? So that's where it starts to get really interesting, is you would not see that creek from the ground, I'm guessing. So most of our privacy concepts that we adhere to today are based on the 2-dimensional vantage point. So that's width, so how far I can see from here, and then length, so maybe I can see a mile out or 2 miles out, depending on how good my vision is. I can also see basically my height, so I can see what's over, 4 feet for me, 5.5 feet for you guys. And so this is what most privacy rules are founded upon. But now with drones, we introduce this three-dimensional observation. Now you have this third layer of I can go much higher than just, 5-6 feet. I can go up to, 400 feet is now the legal limit for drones. So do we need to change our privacy laws to adhere to this new normal of more that we can see? So I do want to walk it back a little bit. I know people get really creeped out by drones looking at things, but you all work with cameras every day. You probably work with telephoto lenses, and how are those any less creepy than a drone? And should we have special privacy laws for telephoto lenses? You also have a creepy camera in your pocket right now, is this. And this, do we need special privacy laws for the phone for the camera on this phone? We do not have any special privacy laws. But as this article asks, are drones better than telephoto lenses for spying? And I would argue no. So here's an example of an article from a very classy publication called TMZ. And they ran photos of Kate Middleton. She was topless sunbathing, and she was in a remote island miles and miles and miles away from anybody else. And TMZ managed to get these topless sunbathing photos, and it's because they had a telephoto lens. Now, actually, a French court decided you cannot run those, even though she was on an island, which is public space. I would be curious to see how the U.S. would rule on this TMZ example. I'll give you another example. I used to work at NBC in Los Angeles, and here's a story that we ran. This was many, many years ago before drones were even a word in our vocabulary, but it was in the first it was in a drought in 2008 or 2009 in LA. And what had happened is during a drought in Southern California, they make these rules that you can only water your lawn once a week. So as you can imagine, if you can only water your lawn once a week, your lawns turn brown. Now, the mayor of Los Angeles lived behind a big wall, and his lawn was bright green. So you can imagine how that happened and how he got around the rule that you can only water your lawn once a night. So we actually sent an intern to climb up a wall to get this footage of the mayor watering his lawn every single night. And in classic LA TV style, we accosted the mayor and was like, look at this footage. You are watering your lawn, and it's very dramatic, as you can see from that photo. I love LA TV, but I think we sent an intern to climb up a wall, and no one really was concerned about the privacy issues. The mayor was a little bit creeped out for sure. But you think with a drone that becomes so much easier, and it's all fun to laugh at the mayor for us looking at him watering the lawn, but what if that's my drone looking at your lawn? Now that becomes really creepy and something that you probably don't like. So often with drones, it's not necessarily a legal question, but it sort of becomes more of an ethical question. And would you use these images? So in the case of the mayor, we say, yes, that's a public figure. We can, but in the case of your kid's birthday party in the backyard, ethically, probably not. So I talk to a lot of journalism students, and I present to them some ethical questions. So for this watering lawn story, if it is private citizen, would you run those images? Would you look into their backyards with a drone? And I would probably say if it's a single individual, probably not. But if it's a trend, that might be worth a story. If you're covering a new product, maybe the Apple self-driving cars, and you get an image of this secret new car, do you run that? Probably, actually. You want to be the news organization to have taken that photo. If it's Donald Trump playing golf with Putin on a private island, do you run those images? If it's Kate Middleton topless sunbathing, maybe not, but this definitely has news value. I would absolutely use a drone to get that image if it existed. So I'm going to add another layer of complexity. It's not just cameras. With drones, actually yesterday, DJI just announced a 6K camera. There's LiDAR, there's thermal cameras, and they add this extra layer of privacy complexity. So this is exactly what a DJI thermal camera looks like. It just connects right to the drone, and you can see in real time what the camera is seeing exactly on your phone. That's an example of what it looks like. And here's an example of that. So the Telegraph in 2013, again, they didn't use a drone. They worked with the government on this story about migrant workers who were being housed, and they were putting like 12 people in one shed, which is obviously this, human rights violation, and the Telegraph had a feeling this was happening. So they flew thermal cameras over these sheds and found that yes, there are these people being housed dangerously. And so again, this is an example of a story that seems, really good, and we saved these migrant workers from these dangerous conditions with an aerial thermal camera. But that's also really creepy that a thermal camera is able to see through your shed and know how many bodies are inside. So as far as drone privacy laws today, the FAA has no drone-specific privacy laws. Their main concern is just safety in the airspace. So they're responsible for putting up this big no-fly zone around DC. You can't fly drones here because they want to protect this area, or you cannot fly around airports. But it's only just for safety. They don't really care about privacy at all. However, states are passing privacy-related drone laws. So many states have rules about a reasonable expectation of privacy. I can't photograph you in a locker room. I can't photograph you even if I'm on a public street looking into your bathroom, because you have a reasonable expectation of privacy there. But some of these states are actually taking it a step further. Here's just something I pulled from Wisconsin's rules, and they say Wisconsin law prohibits an individual from using a drone where the individual has a reasonable expectation of privacy. So some states are taking it upon themselves to actually come up with their own privacy laws. I did want to sort of walk it back. I know some of you guys are interested in flying drones for yourself, so I did want to take a second to explain how you can do that. Up until June of 2016, commercial drone use in the US was actually illegal, so you couldn't use it at your TV or radio stations. But in June of 2017, the FAA announced Part 107, which makes drone use legal. Is all you have to do is take a test, and you have to pass it, and once you do, it's much like taking your driver's license test when you're 15 and a half. You get your license and you can go ahead and fly drones. So as of 2016, this was 6 months after the testing became available, 5,000 people had taken and passed it, and it's been more than a year since then. So they just ask you things about regulation, airspace, weather. I know you guys are probably experts in a lot of these areas already. So you just simply take this test, and once you pass it, you get your card. It looks exactly like that, and there are rules. You have to keep your aircraft within visual line of sight, so you can't let it fly even behind a building, which is problematic. I know a lot of you are inspecting, a radio tower, and if you can't see that drone for a second, even when it's around the other side, that's beyond your visual line of sight, which is problematic. You can only fly during daylight, and often many of you want to do something at nighttime. You cannot fly over people not directly involved in the operation. You must keep your drones under 100 miles per hour, which is probably okay for all of you guys, and then you can fly drones legally. If you do need to break some of these, you do need to fly at night, you can just apply and get a waiver from the FAA to do that. I know we were talking about one of these towers was within 2 miles of an airport, you said. You can actually get a waiver to fly closer to the airport. So once you get that, you can be a remote pilot in command. So every person in the drone operation needs to be, or one person, in the drone operation needs to be a remote pilot in command. And so if you have someone at your radio or TV station who's got this license, you can still fly the drone as long as somebody else is still participating. But the bottom line when it comes to privacy is that no one has the authority to regulate privacy around a drone. Nobody can say you cannot fly and look into these people's look into these people's yards. So as you guys get your coffee and desserts or walk down to the next session, I did want you guys to sort of ponder on these questions. How drones are redefining your expectation of privacy? Does the legal framework work for drones? Do we need something different? What best practices should we establish? If not rules, are there best practices that you guys should be making for yourselves? But the drone status of privacy laws are very complicated. They're tricky. There is no right answer. I can assure you it is a lot more complicated than just chickens crashing into walls. So thank you so much for having me. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon.